Hi everyone. Welcome. It's 3 o'clock for you guys. It's 1 o'clock here in the UK, which is where I am logging in from. But it's 3 o'clock for you. So we will get started. And thank you as well. I know sort of those of you who logged into this session initially thought it was going to be at 2:30. And unfortunately, I was unable to make that time as something came up. So thank you for changing to this slightly later time. But we will get started. It looks like the session's being recorded as well, so people will be able to watch it back. And it's really, really lovely to kind of meet all of you who are coming. I'm presuming you're all in Lebanon. So yeah, it's really lovely to meet you all, and thank you so much for joining. So my name is Kat. Before I start the PowerPoint presentation, I will just introduce myself. So my name is Kat, and I work as, so originally my qualification was in occupational therapy. And I have always worked in mental health settings. I came originally from a background of working in acute psychiatric inpatient settings with adults. I have worked for community crisis teams, so worked with people who are living in the community at home, but again, struggling and at crisis point with their mental health. And I have more recently spent a lot of time working with children and young people. So which is why at the moment I'm in a school, which is why it's an interesting background behind me. This isn't my home. I'm in a school at the moment as I work with children and young people, supporting their mental health and well-being. And through the journey that I've been on, working in mental health in various different ways, I very quickly realized that certainly in the UK, but I think just as a culture, as a human race, we generally work to a real sort of deficit model. We wait until people are unwell, and then we treat them. We try and fix them, and we try and get them better. And this never really made sense to me. And I have always had a real interest in positive psychology, in happiness, in things that we can do to enhance people's well-being. And there is a phrase in positive psychology. It was coined by Martin Seligman, who was one of the founders of the movement. And he said, build what's strong, don't fix what's wrong. So rather than waiting to sort of fix someone when they're broken, when they're unwell, what we should actually try and do as a collective and also as individuals is work out sort of what we can do to build up what we already have in place, to build what's strong rather than fixing what's wrong. So rather than focus on the problem or waiting until people are unwell and then fixing them, we should find ways to sort of build them up, build on their strengths, help them to be the best version of themselves they can possibly be. And then the hope is that when life does become challenging, when we do face problems, which we always will in life, that we will be in a much better position to face those challenges. So that is why I'm here. That is why I was asked to do this session, and why I guess I suggested doing it on practical mindfulness. And so the other reason is that often I think mindfulness, meditation, well-being, all of these things, they can be quite cerebral. They can be very much based on sort of how we think about things, and they can be based on theory and concepts. And actually, for me, theory and concept will only get us so far. But sometimes we just, as humans, need really practical strategies and things that we can do to help us to move forwards in life. And so in this session, and I will tell you more in a moment when I share my slides, but what we're going to be doing is we're going to start off just looking a little bit at the background of mindfulness. What is it? Why is it useful? Why do we need it as humans? Why do we struggle with being mindful and being present in the moment? We're then going to look at sort of what you can do. I'm going to share with you what you can do to help support yourselves when it comes to being more mindful, being more in the moment. And then we're going to look at how you can do it. So actually, I'm going to hand over some tools, some techniques, some strategies that hopefully you can usefully use yourselves, with people in your lives, with friends, with family, with fellow students or staff, depending on your role. And do so everything that I teach you today, nothing is nothing is sacred, nothing sort of needs to be done a really specific way, or you don't need sort of years of training to be able to do these things, but actually take them, use them as your own, try them out, experiment, change them, and just see how you get on. Because for me, one of the most important things when it comes to being more mindful in life is just to have fun, just to try things out, just to be playful and to see how you get on. And I will put my email address, it's in the final slide. So if anyone does want to get in touch or ask me any more questions, then don't hesitate to do so. Okay, so I will share my screen with you and we will get started. So I've given you a little bit of an introduction. And hopefully, I think everyone should be able to see the screen now. So hopefully now you have a little bit of an idea of why I'm here, why I am sitting in front of you, and why you are spending your valuable time engaging in this session. And I guess the thing to add is that just because I am a mental health professional and I work in this kind of field does not mean that I am perfect, and does not mean that I don't sometimes struggle with my own well-being, my own mental health. And so everything that I teach you today, everything that I talk about, they're all techniques that I have used and tried out and practiced myself. And so I don't ever share with anyone anything that I don't find useful, that I haven't found helpful, and that I haven't tried myself. So hopefully that lets you know that I'm not just sort of sitting here preaching at you while I go off and do different things, but actually these are all things that I have found really useful in supporting my own well-being. Okay. And the first thing that I think is really important to do is to name the elephant in the room. Okay. So when it comes to mindfulness and to well-being, sometimes we can be taught by all sorts of people in the world around us that when we are struggling with our mental health, when we are feeling anxious or low or depressed or sad or scared, we're often taught to block it out, to distract ourselves, to not think about those things, to just kind of do mindfulness techniques as a way of distraction, of pretending that everything's okay. And in my experience, and in line with the therapeutic model that I draw on most in my work, which is ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy, this doesn't work. If we ignore the difficult thoughts and feelings, if we ignore the worries and the problems, it doesn't make them go away. They're still there. And often they will just fester and they will end up coming out at times when we really finding life difficult. And so just looking at the elephant in the room, this is a phrase that we have in the UK. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of it or use it, but the elephant in the room is the thing that we need to look at. And in acknowledging our difficult feelings, acknowledging as humans that sometimes we get really stressed out, that sometimes we get anxious, that sometimes we're scared, that sometimes we're fearful, it actually can help to really take the power out of those feelings and help us to really find ways that we can move forwards, living a life with those feelings rather than trying to block them out and pretend they're not there. And that's what this session is about accepting that we are all human, that sometimes we struggle, and that is okay. As such, mindfulness is not about clearing the mind of all negative thoughts. Mindfulness and meditation is not about emptying and freeing the mind so that we never have a difficult or distracting or challenging thought or feeling again. But what mindfulness is about allowing those difficult thoughts and feelings in, is about allowing yourself to be human, to struggle sometimes, accepting those difficult thoughts, and then letting them come and go as they please. And this is very much in line with a poem that some of you may have come across before. It's called The Guest House, and it was written by the poet Rumi in, I think it was the 1300s. It was certainly a very long time ago. And I wanted to read this poem to you today to start off our session, because as far as I'm concerned, this poem really sums up what mindfulness is all about and what the point is and why we practice it. And the poem reads as follows. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. It may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So what I would encourage you to do throughout this session as an experiment, but from today onwards, if you feel able to, and some of you may have a mindfulness practice already, but is to really ground yourself in this idea that mindfulness is not about ridding the mind of difficult thoughts and feelings, but it's about welcoming them in and saying, okay, I know that you are a part of being human, and I welcome you, I embrace you, and I'm going to try and find ways that I can be mindful regardless of the difficult thoughts, feelings, and situations. Okay, so let's come on to the why. So as I said at the start, for me, it's really important that we acknowledge why. Why do we even need to practice mindfulness? What is the point? Why do humans need to be mindful? Because often we are told by people, oh, you know, mindfulness is great. You should practice mindfulness. You should be more mindful. But rarely do people tell us why. Why is it important? My PowerPoint slides are often, I used to work as a university lecturer, and students would often ask if they could have a copy of my slides, and I would say to them, yes, you can, but they might not make much sense. I'm a very visual learner, and I like pictures, and the pictures are prompts to remind me to what to talk about. So again, I'm very happy to share my slides with people, but do be warned that they might be a little bit abstract. So there are three pictures here. The first one is of a caveman. The second one is of one of those toys that you have as a small child where you sort of sort shapes into different holes. And the third one is of a hand and a forearm. So we're going to start with the caveman. So why bother practicing mindfulness? Okay, so the idea is to just take a moment to think about all of the things that prehistoric humans were scared of. So I want you to take a moment. You can write them down, or you can just take a moment or two to have a think about what were cavemen, what were cave people scared of? What kinds of things would they have worried about? Okay, so normally if I do this in person, it's a shame that I'm online, because if I do this in person, sometimes I will sort of have the discussion in the room. But usually when I do this exercise, the kinds of things people say are, okay, cave people would have been worried about wild animals. You know, back in cavemen times, there were a lot of very ferocious beasts that would have killed you given half the chance. Saber-toothed tigers, woolly mammoths, sea creatures, tigers, lions, poisonous snakes and spiders. There were all sorts of creatures and animals that were lethal, that cave people would have been very scared of. What else? Having enough food. People usually name that one quite early on. Cave people would have been really worried about getting enough food. They couldn't just go to the local supermarket. But if they found a bush that was covered in wild berries, they knew that once they'd finished those berries, it might be a really long time until they found some more. Or if they went out hunting and didn't catch anything, it could be days until they had food. So they would have really worried about where their next meal was going to come from. The same with water. You know, they didn't necessarily know how often they were going to find fresh drinking water that could sustain them. Cave people would have worried about shelter, having enough shelter, having warmth. If they were in a part of the world where there were, cold or icy conditions or heat, they needed shelter in order to stay safe, to stay warm, to stay dry. What else? Cave people would have worried about other cave people. As we generally know, cave people were tribal. Humans are pack animals. We are tribal creatures, and they would have had tribes, groups that they went around with. And you didn't want to upset someone in your tribe, because if you got kicked out of your tribe, then life was going to be quite dangerous for you. You couldn't really survive on your own. You needed a tribe, a group of people around you. Similarly, you didn't want to anger or upset anyone from another tribe, because they would have potentially fought you and been quite threatening towards you. Okay. So we could probably go on, but as you can see, there are quite a few things that cave people would have been worried about. And I want you to take a moment now to think, if they had succumbed to any of these threats, any of these worries, what would have happened? Okay, so you are correct if your answer was that they would have very probably died. Everything that cave people were worried about, everything that threatened them, was pretty much life-threatening. There was a lot to be scared of in prehistoric times. And the reason that I'm talking about this, the reason that I'm spending all this time talking about cave people, is because although we like to think that our brains are highly evolved machines that are nothing like they were back in those days, our brains are pretty similar, and they're wired in many ways, in a very similar way to our prehistoric ancestors. And you can see how it was in a cave person's best interests. It was, our survival as the human race relied on the fact that cave people worried about everything. They had to worry about what had happened in the past. If they got into a dangerous situation with a wild animal and they just escaped with their life, then it was in their interests and the human race's interest for them to spend some time worrying about what happened. Why did I get myself in that situation? How can I avoid that happening again? How can I prevent myself from being attacked by an animal in the future? They also had to worry about the future. If they saw a group of people that they didn't know coming across the horizon, they had to worry about, who are they? What might they want from us? Are they dangerous? Have they got weapons with them? What's going to happen? What do I need to do if this, and this happens? And so you can see very quickly how cave people, and as early humans, we were wired to worry about everything. Our brains were designed and wired to be worrying machines. And as I said, the fact that we are here nowadays, sitting in front of our computers, listening to this session, is testament to the fact that our ancestors worried about anything and everything. And so the reason I tell you this is to, first of all, just allow you to take a moment to realize that if you do worry, if you are a worrier, if you struggle with difficult thoughts and feelings and anxiety and stress, congratulations, you're a human. We are kind of designed to worry about stuff. Mindfulness doesn't come easy to us. It can also be useful to acknowledge this fact, just as a reminder that, okay, we need to work on this. Our brains aren't naturally able to spend much time in the present. And if you find that you're constantly being hooked into the past or worried about the future, this is really normal. This is part of being human. But it shows us why it's really important to work on training the brain to be able to unhook from those worries and spend more time in the present. Okay. The next picture which illustrates why we need to practice mindfulness, is this middle one, those toys. If any of you have small children, they may have one of these toys themselves. And it's those blocks where you have sort of different shaped holes, and you put the star-shaped block in the star-shaped hole, you put the triangle block in the triangle hole. And we do, as humans, we generally do exactly the same with our emotions, with our feelings. So from a very young age, we are generally taught that certain feelings are good, and so we put those in the good in the good box, and certain feelings are bad. We don't like them, we don't want them, we don't want to feel them, we want to get rid of them, and we put those feelings in the bad box or the bad hole. I can probably read all of your minds now if we do a quick thought experiment. And I'm going to say to you in a moment, so I'm going to name some different emotions, some different feelings. And without thinking too hard, without trying to work out what the right answer is, I'm going to name different feelings, and I want you just to instinctively think to yourself, good or bad. Just label the words that I say next as either good or bad. Okay, so happiness. Good. I'm guessing most people put that in the good box. Excitement. Good. Sadness. Instinctively, I imagine most of you probably put that in the bad category. Anger. Bad. Depression. Anxiety. Bad. Joy. Good. Okay. We could probably keep going. And as I said, if you're thinking logically and rationally, you might have chosen different categories, but instinctively, we are educated to decide that certain emotions are labeled as good. We want those, we want more of them, we like feeling them, and certain ones are bad and we don't want them. We want to get rid of them and avoid them at all costs. And so what we will often learn to do as we grow up, as we go through life, is to avoid certain situations. We will learn on some level to try and avoid any situation that might make us feel a difficult feeling. So whether that's sort of busy social situations with other people, or difficult conversations with people we care about, or I don't know, extreme sports or swimming in the sea because we're scared of, I don't know, sharks or that kind of thing, whether it's rational or not. We are taught to avoid certain situations because they bring up difficult feelings that we don't like and we've been taught are bad. However, as we saw from the Rumi poem that I started with, as far as I'm concerned, and what we're realizing more and more as humans, is that all feelings are good. There is no such thing as a bad feeling. It's how we respond to them that can be unhealthy or unhelpful. But actually, all feelings are good. All feelings are useful. All feelings are designed to communicate to us what we might need to do next, what might be going on for us, any changes that we might need to make in our lives. And so again, another really important reason to practice mindfulness is to help us just to learn to allow whatever we're feeling in, to stop blocking out certain feelings or avoiding them, but just to allow and embrace and learn to live with all feelings rather than labeling them as good or bad. Okay, the third picture, which I'm going to demonstrate to you now, is what's known as the hand-brain model. And it was a neuroscientist, I forget his name, but if you look up the hand-brain model, you will find him. Apologies for forgetting his name. But the hand-brain model, so I'm not a neuroscientist by any means, so it will be a very basic description. But the hand-brain model is a really good way of describing, particularly to young people, how our mind works and why it's useful to practice mindfulness. Okay, so if you imagine that my forearm here is the brain stem, is the spinal cord. So obviously this kind of goes down through the spine and it feeds all of the muscles and gives them messages on how to move and how to interact and be in the world. So this is the spinal cord. My wrist is the base of the skull. Okay, this is the base of the skull. And then our brains have, and apologies, some of you may know way more about this than I do, so apologies for making it very basic. But this first part, the kind of heel of the hand here, is the inner central core of our brain. And this is often referred to as the reptile or the reptilian brain. And this is the part of the brain that is responsible for all of our basic bodily functions. So even if we were unconscious or in a coma, this part of the brain is still working away. So this is what's responsible for sort of causing us to sweat when we're hot, causing our heart to beat, to keep blood pumping around our body. It helps us to breathe. It causes us to trying to think what else it does. All of the basic, to shiver when we're cold, all of the basic kind of bodily functions are controlled by this central part of the brain. If I tuck my thumb in, we can imagine that this is now the second middle layer of the brain. And this is often called the mammalian brain, the mammal brain, or the monkey brain is how people often refer to it. And this is the part of the brain that is responsible for fight or flight. So this is the part of the brain that we have in common with all other mammals. So you will have probably heard of fight or flight. I think often there's lots of ways of talking about it. Sometimes it's fight, flight, freeze. I've heard people now talk about fight, flight, freeze, stop and flop. But generally, if any of you have pets, so cats and dogs are really good at sort of seeing this in its purest form. So if they face a threat, if something scares them, they will either fight it or they will run away. Or the freeze is where we might sort of panic and go into freeze mode. So this is the part of the brain that we have in common with all mammals, which is where when we're faced with a threat, if we go into this part of the brain, we will either sort of feel panic and freeze, we will run away, or we will try and fight it. And then we have the third part of the brain, the outer layer known as the cerebral cortex. And this is the part of the brain that makes humans stand out from other creatures. This is the part of the brain that is responsible for kind of logical, calm, rational thought. This is the part of the brain that is responsible for our emotions. This is the part of the brain, particularly the frontal lobes, that are enhanced when we practice mindfulness. And the reason that the hand-brain model is particularly useful is because it helps us to explain not only how our brain functions, but what happens when we are scared, when we face a threat, when we go into that caveman mind, and what happens when we face a threat and we're not able to engage our calm, rational brain. Is what happens is we flip our lid and our brain goes like this. The cerebral cortex kind of goes out the window and we go into fight or flight mode. We panic. The thing is, we are not cave people anymore. And the kinds of threats that we face in the modern world aren't necessarily the kind of things that we can fight or run away from. And so this response isn't helpful anymore, but because as human beings, we haven't actually been inhabiting the planet for that long. Our brain hasn't evolved to have a really strong cerebral cortex. And so the final reason, if you need any more, to practice mindfulness is to just help strengthen this part of the brain in order to help us to stay calm and face the challenges that we experience in life in a more rational and calm and grounded way, rather than panicking and going into survival mode. Okay. So what we can do to be more mindful, we've looked at the why, we've looked at why we need to be mindful. What can we do to help us to be more mindful? So first of all, for me, one of the most important things is to get rid of the idea that it's going to be difficult, that it's going to be unenjoyable, that it's going to be hard. I have been I've been a culprit of doing this, where I will talk to people about mindfulness in the past and say to them, no, it's not easy. It takes a lot of effort. You've really got to practice. It's quite hard. And so obviously then people come to mindfulness kind of geared up for a battle, for a fight, for thinking, oh, this is going to be really difficult. I'm not going to enjoy this. I'm not going to find it easy. I'm never going to be able to do it. And then when they don't end up feeling like the person in this picture, in this left-hand picture here, sort of sitting all zen and calm and with a clear mind, then they think that they're doing it wrong. And often people will either not try it in the first place, or they will give up straight away because they think, my mind's still cluttered. I still struggle with difficult thoughts and feelings. I still go into fight or flight mode sometimes. I can't do it. This isn't for me. And it's exactly the same as if you were sort of recommending a book to someone. If you said to someone, there's this really brilliant book that I want you to read, but it's really difficult. It's really hard going. You're not going to enjoy it at all. It's going to take you ages. You're going to struggle loads, but it's brilliant. You have to read it. They're probably not going to want to pick that book up. Whereas if we say to them, there's this brilliant book, it's great, you'll find it really useful, have a go, then they're going to be much more inclined to read it and just see what happens. And so for me, meditation isn't about crafting the perfect daily practice, or mindfulness isn't about going through life, feeling completely zen and with a clear and free mind. But meditation is about just experimenting, just trying it out, being playful, having a go, and just seeing what happens, and trusting that, maybe it is as simple as just being in the present moment, even if that's for a split second before your mind hooks you in again. You've done it. You've been mindful. And then you do it again the next time. So I find this cartoon here is much more descriptive of how I find mindfulness and meditation, sort of trying to do it sitting there. Then I get hooked into thoughts and feelings. My mind starts racing off and I start wondering about what I'm going to have for lunch or dinner, or what I'm going to say to my friend when I see them that evening. And then I sit there and think, ugh, I can't do this. I'm rubbish. I can't be mindful. I've failed. Rather than realizing that actually that's the point. The point isn't to clear your mind and always be present in the moment. The purpose and the point of mindfulness is to keep noticing when you're not in the moment. And in those times when you notice, just come back. Okay, so how can we do this? This is the biggest challenge, and this is the main thing that I wanted to explore with you today. So this model, which comes from, it's called the triflex, and it comes from acceptance and commitment therapy. It was developed by someone called Russ Harris, a therapist called Russ Harris. And this, I find, is a really useful place to start. And in the center of this triangle, you can see that it says psychological flexibility. And like I was just talking about, for me, it's really important to be flexible psychologically, rather than sort of creating narratives around mindfulness of, I can't do it, it's difficult, I'm never going to get there, it's a lifelong piece of work, and it's hard. It's about being psychologically flexible and thinking, okay, I'm going to give it a try and I'm going to see what happens, and I'm going to trust that I have the ability to do whatever I want to do in life. And the three ways that we can help ourselves to be psychologically flexible are, at the top of the triangle, to be present in the moment. I'm going to expand on these in a moment or two. To be present. So like I talked about, just be present in the moment, rather than like our cavemen ancestors getting hooked into worrying about the past, because the past has happened. The past is over. There's nothing we can do to change the past. Or rather than worrying about the future and what's going to happen next. Now, don't get me wrong. People will often say to me, well, isn't it important sometimes to plan for the future or to reflect on the past? Yes, it is. It's really important. But as soon as we start getting hooked into ruminating or worrying or being anxious about the future and hypothetical scenarios, then it's not useful. It's about sort of reflecting on the past. What happened yesterday when I had an argument with a friend? How could I avoid that next time? What could I do differently? Brilliant. Okay. And then leave it there. Or thinking about the future. Okay, I've got a big assignment or a big piece of work coming up. How can I best prepare for that? Is there anything else I need to think about? And when you've done that, stopping rather than worrying and thinking, oh, but what if this happens? And what if this happens? So being present in the moment, opening up. This is about being open, like we looked at with the Rumi poem, being open to whatever feelings and thoughts come our way. And rather than trying to block them out, get rid of them, label them as bad, just being open to our experience of being alive, of being human, and in trusting that we are strong enough and capable enough to handle it. And the third point on the triflex is to do what matters. So I'm going to expand on these now. There we are. So we have, when it comes to being present, this is described as focusing on what's important and engaging in what you're doing. So when it comes to finding ways to be more present in life, it's about focusing on what's important, in this moment in time, what actually matters, what's important to me, what's being asked of me. So in this session, hopefully, it may be that you've all zoned out or you've got other things distracting you, but hopefully, whilst you're sitting in front of your computer screens right now, it's kind of coming back to thinking of what's important. It's about just focusing on what Kat's talking about. It's just being present and seeing what happens. Opening up. So this is about acknowledging and allowing all of your thoughts and feelings, as we've looked at. There is no such thing as a bad feeling or a wrong feeling, but actually all feelings are useful. And so allowing ourselves to open up to them, to notice them, to try and think about what are they communicating, and doing what matters. So this is the third, and we're going to look at all of these in more detail in a moment and what you can do to really harness these points. But doing what matters in life, for me, is sort of the ultimate in where we're trying to get to. And this is where we live a life guided by our values. And we take action rather than just sort of being present and opening up to our feelings. We then sort of take action and we engage in the world and we engage in life in a way that's in line with our values. Okay. So for the final part of this session, as I said, I want to just share with you some tools and techniques that I find can be really useful in helping me to be more mindful and more present and more engaged in life. And we're going to practice some of these as we go along. So I will get you at home. I won't ask you to sort of share your screens or your microphones or anything, but at home, if you feel able to, then I'm going to ask you just to try out some of these techniques along with me. And as I said, any of these that I use, some of you may have come across them already. But if you haven't, or even if you have, feel free to kind of try them out yourselves, to take them away with you, to make them your own, to change them, to teach them to other people, and just see how you get on. Again, just have fun, just experiment and see how you go. Okay, so this first picture, this cartoon of someone on a surfboard. So the idea is that our difficult feelings are like waves on an ocean. And when we practice mindfulness, rather than maybe sort of swimming away from those waves or letting them crash over us and destroy us, mindfulness is when we pick up a surfboard and we decide to get on that wave and to ride it and just to see where it takes us. So what I want you to do now is, and please don't feel that you need to sort of go any deeper than you feel comfortable, or don't think about anything that you don't feel comfortable thinking about right now. Just take it a step at a time. But what I want you to do is just take a moment to think about a difficult feeling, a feeling that you don't enjoy experiencing, a feeling that you struggle with. So for example, for me, it might be anxiety. I don't enjoy feeling anxious. And so whatever the feeling is that you don't like or that you struggle with, I want you just to take a moment and see if you can think of a situation when you experience that feeling, and see if you can just bring that feeling up a little bit now. Just notice it. And just let it be there. And as if this feeling is a wave, I want you to imagine that you are just surfing it. I don't know if any of you have tried surfing. I imagine you've seen people do it if you haven't. And when you are standing on that surfboard and you catch a wave, usually the immediate first initial thought is, oh my goodness, this is so scary, I need to jump off. But what we know about surfing and what we know about waves is that eventually, if we stay on that surfboard, if we stay riding the wave, eventually we know that it will pass, that it will disappear, and we'll be able to step off the surfboard and catch another wave. And it's exactly the same with our difficult feelings. If any of you have children who struggle with difficult thoughts and feelings, using this analogy of difficult feelings like waves can be really helpful in saying to them, you know, what we know about waves is they rise, they reach a peak, and they always fall again. And it's the same with our feelings. And so rather than running away from them, it's about surfing them, letting them just reach their crescendo, and then trusting always that they will pass and that something else will come along. The second middle picture is, it represents different breathing techniques. And one of the breathing techniques that I wanted to teach you in a moment is something called square or box breathing. Some of you may have come across it. And the reason that I particularly like this breathing technique is because it's one that is used by the US Navy SEALs. So it is used for people going into combat. And before I describe this breathing technique with you, or before I get you to practice it, I want to just explain a little bit about why breathing techniques are useful, why we use them. Because I work a lot with children and young people, and they will often say to me, I've been told some different breathing techniques, I've been told to use them, and they don't work. And so then I always ask them the question, well, did anyone explain to you how they were supposed to work, what was supposed to happen? And they say, nope, I just tried them and I didn't feel any better, so they didn't work. And, you know, I will always respond by saying, well, of course they didn't work. If you didn't know what was supposed to happen, then how do you know whether it's worked or not? And if you're hoping that breathing techniques or all of these things, these mindfulness techniques that we use, if you're hoping that they're going to magically make you feel good and make the difficult feeling go away, then no, they're not going to work, because it's not about that. And I describe mindfulness, and particularly breathing techniques, as dropping an anchor. Okay, so the idea is that if a boat is sailing on the ocean and it hears over its radio that a storm is coming, the boat will usually, if it's able to, as quickly as possible, sail into a harbour. It will moor itself up and it will drop an anchor. And the anchor, the point of dropping an anchor is it doesn't make the storm pass any more quickly. It doesn't make the conditions of the storm any less powerful. But it just helps the boat to be a bit firmer, a bit more grounded, and to weather the storm until it passes and it can come out the other side. And it's exactly the same with our difficult thoughts and feelings, what I sometimes refer to as emotional weather. Practicing mindfulness, practicing breathing and grounding techniques, it doesn't make the difficult feeling, the emotional storm, pass any more quickly, but it helps us just to feel a bit more grounded, a bit more stable, and able to weather the storm, to surf the waves until they pass and we can come out the other side. And for me, that is the point. So we're going to quickly practice this breathing technique. And it's a really simple one. And as I say, you can teach this to anyone else after today. So what I want you to do is pick a square or a rectangle shape in the room around you. And the beauty of being indoors is that there are square or rectangle shapes everywhere. Your computer screen is a perfect example, so you can pick that one if you want. And in a moment, I'm going to count you along. And what we're going to do is we're going to trace either with our eye or our finger along the bottom edge of the square as we breathe in for 4 seconds. We're then, with our eye, going to trace up one side of the square for 4 seconds as we hold that breath. We will then trace along the top of the square as we breathe out for 4 seconds. And then we will trace down the far side of the square as we hold that breath for 4. Okay, so when you're ready, just take a nice deep breath out. Okay, And now as we trace along the bottom of the square, breathing in through the nose for 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold that breath as you trace up, 2, 3, 4. Breathing out through the mouth, 2, 3, 4, and hold, 2, 3, 4. Breathing in, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Breathing out through the mouth, 2, 3, 4, and hold, 2, 3, 4. And let's just do one more round in your own time. So breathing in, hold it, breathing out, and hold. Okay, and now just allow your breath to come back to normal, to find its own rhythm. Take a few moments. Particularly if you're not used to practicing breathing techniques, they can sometimes make you feel a bit lightheaded because your brain will be thinking, whoa, we don't breathe like this normally, what's going on? But don't let that deter you. Keep practicing. And as I said, the point of breathing techniques is not to make you suddenly feel wonderful or okay, but it's to help you just to feel a bit more grounded and able to cope with the difficult situation. And this third picture is a technique that I think is really important to practice in life when it comes to being more mindful. And this picture for me represents self-compassion or self-kindness. So there is a woman in the States who, she's called Kristin Neff, Kristen Neff, Neff. And she's done a lot of research into self-compassion, a lot of research, a lot of kind of experiments and studies. And she has found not only is self-compassion really powerful in, again, helping us to cope with difficult situations in day-to-day life, but it's also really powerful in helping us just to support ourselves and be able to move forwards, being more mindful. And the best place to start, which this picture illustrates, is if nothing more, when we are struggling, when we're in a difficult situation, we want to be more mindful, is just to have some contact with our own body, just to have some skin-on-skin contact. So clasping your hands, putting your hands one in the other, placing your hands in your lap. If you're in a meeting and you're feeling stressed or anxious or worried, just connecting with your body. They've shown in lots of research trials can be really powerful in helping us just to feel a little bit calmer and a little bit more in control. And then there are 3 points to what she calls the self-compassion break. And it's a really short, it takes moments, and you can practice it in your mind anywhere, in any situation. And what you do, so to do this, what I want you to do is I want you to bring again, a difficult situation to mind. Don't go any deeper than you feel comfortable, but it might be sort of imagining yourself in a stressful meeting or in a party, in a difficult social situation. I want you to imagine yourself in that situation. And the first part of the self-compassion break is where we just acknowledge what's happening. We look at the elephant in the room and we just acknowledge and allow ourselves, whatever it is we're experiencing. So you might say something to yourself like, I'm really struggling right now, or I'm going through a moment of struggle. So just acknowledge to yourself, I'm really struggling right now. The second stage is where she says, or she refers to it as connecting with common humanity. And this is where we remind ourselves that actually we're not alone, that everyone struggles sometimes. So you might say something to yourself like, and it's normal for human beings to struggle sometimes, or everyone struggles at points. And then the third part of the self-compassion break is where we ground ourselves in the fact that, like the waves on the ocean, we know, we can guarantee that at some point this feeling will pass. So we say something along the lines of, and I know that this feeling will pass, or I know that I'm going to be okay. So just practicing it one more time. When you bring a difficult feeling or a difficult situation to mind, saying to yourself, I'm really struggling right now. And it's normal for humans to struggle sometimes. And I know that I'm going to be okay. I know this is going to pass. And again, it doesn't make the situation change, but it helps us just to feel a bit more able to cope. And as I say, there's been a lot of research done into this to see that it has huge profound effects on people's ability to cope. And it's about just showing yourself some kindness as well as powering through. Okay. So the second point, opening up, being open to all of the feelings that you are feeling in life. And so there are three pictures here. The first one is what I refer to as, now this is a technique that I've developed, and I call it the internal weather report. And when it comes to opening up, to being open to whatever thoughts and feelings we're experiencing in life, it can be really important just to sort of take a moment and to really notice, what am I feeling right now? Because sometimes it's really hard to know. You know, that famous question that people ask us when they bump into us in the corridor or on the street, you know, how are you feeling? How are you doing? And sometimes we don't actually know. We never really stop to take notice. So I like to practice this technique in the mornings or whenever I'm feeling something that I'm finding a bit uncomfortable. And it's imagining that our feelings are like weather. They're like internal weather. And the questions that I ask myself are, first of all, if what I'm feeling right now was a color, what color would it be? So you might ask yourself this right now. Whatever you're feeling right now, if it was a color, what color would it be? And then I will ask myself, if this feeling was a shape, what shape would it be? And lastly, if what I am feeling right now were located somewhere in my body, where in my body do I feel it? Is it in my stomach? Is it in my head, my chest? And then what I usually try and do is encourage people just to take a big, deep breath and just breathe into that feeling rather than running away from it or trying to block it out. Just breathe into it, just lean into it and let it be there. And like the wave, trust that it will pass. And so obviously, you know, a feeling can't be a shape or a color, but why this technique is useful is because it can allow us just to develop a relationship with our emotions. The second picture is another way of doing this, and this is what I call characters on the stage. And the idea is that if you're struggling to be mindful, if your mind is constantly sort of chattering away and hooking you into the past or the future, worries, anxieties, is to imagine, and you can do this now actually. So if you're happy to do so, you can either just look down towards your lap or you can close your eyes if it feels comfortable. And I want you to imagine that you are sitting in a big theatre. You're sitting in a big theatre and you are sitting in one of the seats in the audience. There's just you in this theatre and you're sitting in the seat looking at the stage. And every time a thought or a feeling enters your mind, I want you just to imagine that it is a character on the stage. Okay. So you're watching the stage, and I want you just to watch your thoughts and imagine that each thought is like a character on the stage. Some of them might look quite comical. Some of them might be fun or friendly. Some of them might not be so nice. Some of them might be really angry or difficult or worried or anxious. And what you'll find is fairly often it's quite tempting to go up on the stage and start performing with these characters, get hooked into their performance. And each time you notice yourself getting drawn into standing up on stage, I want you just to step back, to notice, and to go back to your seat in the audience. And just watch the characters on the stage. Don't get hooked into the performance. Don't go up on stage with them. Just step back and just watch them do their thing, come and go. And for me, this is a really powerful mindfulness technique. You can come back into the moment. You can open your eyes if they were closed. To me, this is a really useful way of personifying our thoughts and feelings, but allowing ourselves just to create a bit of distance rather than being swept up in the moment and staying mindful and present. And the third technique on this one, on opening up, is to thank the mind. I love this technique. It's a really playful way of building a relationship with particularly our difficult thoughts and feelings. And so when you're trying to be mindful, or when you're struggling to be mindful, and difficult thoughts or feelings enter your mind, every time you notice them, what you do when you're practicing this technique is you just thank them. So, for example, if when I'm teaching a session like this, sometimes my mind might say something to me like, oh, you're talking too fast, or I think this is really boring, no one's listening. I will just notice that thought and I will say, thanks, mind, thanks for sharing. I'm going to get back to what I'm doing though now, because this isn't helpful for me. Or it might say, yeah, but this is rubbish. They could have got a much better speaker to talk about mindfulness. Thanks, mind, thanks for sharing. I'm acknowledging the thought, but I'm going to get back to what I'm doing now, because this is my priority, not getting hooked into that thought. And it can be really useful just to practice this, to thank the mind for sharing the thought, but then coming back to the moment, allowing that thought just to drift off, however many times it keeps hooking you back in, and coming back to the present moment. And the final thing that I wanted to finish off with is to encourage you to connect with your values. So this list here is a list of some of the core values that that can be really important to us in life. And when it comes to being more mindful, sometimes it can be useful to think, well, why do I want to be mindful? What's important to me in life? What kind of person do I want to be in the world? And that can help us to know sort of how we want to embody the practice of mindfulness and why we want to do it, and how we can stay motivated. So I want you just to take a moment to look at this list of values and think, what are your top 3 values from this list? If you were, sometimes I will say to people, if you overheard some friends talking about you, but they didn't know you were listening, what would you want to hear them saying? So that you might want to hear them saying, oh, they're so open-minded, or they're so much fun, or they're really adventurous. I want you just to pick, what are your core values? And the idea with our values is they're not a map. They don't tell us exactly where to go in life and what to do next, but they're like a compass. And whatever difficult situation we're in, checking in with our values can help us to know which direction we want to go next. So don't worry too much if you haven't had a chance to explore these. Again, if you Google lists of values, then you will find plenty out there. And just connecting with your core values can be a really powerful way of helping you to move forwards in life and to take action in the world in line with the kind of person you want to be. Okay, so to finish off with, I wanted to leave you with this lasting thought to just sum up everything that I've talked to you about. And the idea is, if any of you have ever seen one of those snow globes, those kind of globes that you shake and the snow stirs up, and our minds are like a snow globe. And the snow in the snow globe are our difficult thoughts and feelings. And when we are struggling, when we're not being mindful, when we're getting hooked into the past and the future, it's like we're shaking that snow globe and all of those thoughts are whizzing around and we're getting hooked into them and we can't see clearly. And the practice of mindfulness isn't, as I said, about eradicating the mind of any difficult thoughts and feelings. The reason we practice mindfulness is because it just helps us to feel a little bit calmer, a little bit more grounded, and the difficult thoughts and feelings, they don't disappear. But like when you let the snow globe rest, they just come to settle. And although they're still there, we can just see a little bit more clearly and move forwards in life in the way that we want to, rather than in line with what our thoughts and feelings want us to do. Okay, so that concludes our session on practical mindfulness. As I said, my email address is at the bottom there. So do let me know if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, anything that you want to share with me at all. And I guess lastly, just to say thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being able to be part of this amazing wellness week that you're putting on at the university. And thank you so much for joining me as well. It's been absolutely lovely to connect with you all today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Miss Kat, for this lovely session and for all the tips that you have shared with us. I don't know if anyone has a question. Please feel free to ask it now. Now they're all sending their thank yous with the
Brilliant.
hearts and applause. I can't see any questions
Amazing,
still.
thank you. Oh, any
Yeah.
books you can read? Good question. Books you can read. Okay, so I'll put him in the chat, but for me, Thich Nhat Hanh. Some of you may have come across him, but Thich Nhat Hanh was a Vietnamese monk. He died last year, but he has written a lot about mindfulness. So any book, he's written lots and lots of books. Anything by Thich Nhat Hanh, I would really recommend. He is basically like he brought mindfulness to the West, and he worked with Martin Luther King in peace talks in America during the Vietnam War. So he had a lot of experience of how to be mindful in difficult situations. So yeah, that would be my top recommendation. Anything by him. Oh yes, so with the person, Elaine, who said about the feelings on the stage, there isn't time for me to go through it again, but this session was recorded. So if you go to, I think it was in about the last 10 minutes, if you go through this recording, then you'll be able to watch it back, and I'll be able to explain it much better on the recording. So yeah, do take a look at that. Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much,
Take
Miss
care.
Kat, for joining us. Enjoy your day,
Pleasure,
and we
you
will
too.
hopefully see you either sometime soon in Lebanon or in the UK.
Yes, definitely. Keep in touch.